morning, friends, and welcome to Mountain Patriot Homestead. As you can see, I am not backdropped against the side of the house today. I thought you would rather look at a little bit of the barn and the woods than you would just my head against the siding of the house. So today is part 2 of Old Days, Old Ways. Now, last week we started out by talking about some of the family dynamics, my family mostly, and just how the family makeup was back then, at least for us. Of course, it differs from family to family, culture to culture, and around the world. But these videos that I'm putting out about the old days, old ways are focusing mainly on the mid-60s to mid-70s. And sorry, I've got chickens running around all around me. They're curious as to what I'm doing. So when you see me looking off and hear background noises, that's mostly what it is. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the ranch, these videos are focusing mostly on the mid to late 60s and early to mid 70s. That was my early childhood, and I thought it would be fun just to go back. Some of you, it will be a little bit of reminiscing, some old memories maybe, and for others it will be history lessons, and for some of you it's going to seem like ancient history. So I'm doing these videos. Like I said, last week was focusing most on the family. This week I'm talking about technology. Now, what's amusing to me is that I am videotaping using a camera that has probably more computer memory than many of the early computers had that took up a warehouse. So, it's funny to me that, just the difference in technology from then and now. And just the fact that I'm sitting on one of our older riding lawnmowers out here, and just to think that it's considered an older riding lawnmower compared to the zero turn and stuff. When I remember we used push mowers and sling blades and things like that. There weren't any, well, somebody might have had a riding lawnmower, but I don't think there were weed eaters and stuff back then. So, because if there were, I'd never seen one. Daddy used a sling blade, and when I got big enough, I could swing one too. So, just little things like that are differences in technology. But I mentioned first computers. The first computer network, I believe, come about, it was 1968, 69, and 69. And it was ARPANET. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it was ARPANET. But that was the first computer network that came about. But we didn't have, personal computers didn't make it into people's homes. I guess, wealthy had them in their homes in the late 70s, and then people started getting them into their homes more into the 80s. But when I'm talking computers, if for the younger folks, it's nothing like the computers that we have now. These were big old bulky things that, the personal computers that took up, a desk, and they were massive. And they, my first one was a Texas Instruments computer. Now, when I compare it to the computers today, it was more of a word processor than a computer, because there was no Google. You couldn't Google and look up things. You could type stuff on it and print it off. I'm serious. It was more of a word processor was mine than, and anything that I wanted to do on it, I had to program it in. There wasn't at least on mine, there wasn't pre-built programs and all that. And as a matter of fact, the school that I graduated from, shout out to my 1983 high school graduating class. This is our 40th year from celebrating from graduation. So happy graduation anniversary, guys. When I graduated in 1983, there weren't computers in our school at that time. There were word processors, and that was like a big leap because, you went from, when I took typing class, we had to start on a manual typewriter, get good enough. You had to get up to a certain level before you could move on to an electric typewriter. There were no computers. We didn't have computer classes. So computers are something that, it's amazing to me that you see like the very first computer, and I forgot what year it was, but it took up like a warehouse, seriously. It was just this huge conglomeration, and now they've got them, they fit into watches. And so, yes, I do have my notes. So just the fact that we have come so far with computers just in that amount of time, we've got refrigerators. I don't have a refrigerator like that, but there's refrigerators that exist that tell you, hey, you might need to buy milk today, and it'll put it on your list for you. And who would have thought about that? Usually the way we remembered you needed milk is the cow mooed, or you looked in the refrigerator and there was no milk. That was how you remembered you needed milk. Computers have come so far. And then when you get into AI and all of these things where the computers are telling you what you need to do, we've just come so far. It's like we're living in a sci-fi world because when we look back and see old I'm a Twilight Zone fan. When I look back at the Twilight Zone, I see technology on there that was science fiction back then. So we've got it today. So it's pretty interesting. Communications. Communications back during that time, I remember party lines where you would pick up the phone and you would hear your neighbor talking. And you would know, okay, the phone's busy right now, and you would have to hang up. And you would have to wait until whoever was using the phone got off the phone before you could use the phone. And there was always the possibility while you were using the phone, your neighbors down the road, there could be 4 or 5 people on the party line, that while you were having your conversation, somebody else may pick up on it. So you see there that, if you had somebody that was a snoop or a gossip or somebody like that on your party line, you didn't want to just talk about anything because, you didn't air your dirty laundry to the world like people do today. You get on Facebook and everything. Things are, how things are always itching when you're outside. But, people just air everything now. They just tell everything. There's no family secrets. Which some family secrets don't need to be secret, but there's so many things that if you just had to be careful what you were saying on the party line, which I don't know how much sneaking that people did back then, but I'm sure there was still some. But when you look at it today, we've went from party lines where you had to share a landline with multiple people up and down your road to we've got cell phones in our pockets. Everywhere I go, I can walk into a public bathroom and there'll be somebody in the bathroom on the cell phone. It's like, why would, I just don't get it. I don't understand going to the bathroom with a cell phone, but regardless, there are phones everywhere. We went from having a party line to having a private line, which was a big deal. And then as, there were pay phones. Does anybody remember the last time you've seen a pay phone? I'm sure there's pay phones somewhere. But even pay phones, the last pay phone I seen, it accepted credit card, and rather than a quarter, because I remember used to, you would carry change in case you needed to use the pay phone, and that was if in an emergency you were away from home and you needed to call home or call wherever, you plugged in your coin and you made your call, or you made a collect call. So, the progression there. And I remember as a law enforcement officer, if the dispatch or the office said, can you call the office, you would have to go to the nearest convenience store or wherever you could to find a phone, even a pay phone, and call back to the office. Well, now, all the officers have cell phones, so they just either dispatch calls them directly or they call dispatch. So it's a lot different communications back then and now. We, especially back during the Zoom meetings and Skype's been around for a while now, but all the conference meetings, used to you had conference calls. Now you have video meetings and that sort of thing. So, technology with communications has really grown by leaps and bounds, and is totally, thank you, buddy, is just totally different from what it used to be. Television. Televisions were these big giant boxes, and sometimes they had a phonograph, a record player in it, and in one part of the cabinet. I mean, they were these big cabinets, or if they were standalone TVs, they were these big bulbous looking, and they were black and white. We didn't have a color TV. We had a big old black and white TV, and the remote control consisted of one of us getting up and going changing the channel. So, and what's funny about that is, depending on where you were, most of the time we only had one channel, so there wasn't a whole lot of changing channels. If you wanted the volume changed, now, you had to get up and go change the volume. But everything was manual. There was no just sitting there and doing this with your thumb. The antennas, the little clip right at the beginning, you see that was my daddy on top of the house working on the antenna. Because the antennas were these things that stuck way up on top of the roof. Some people still have them. Not a lot of people. Most people are on some type of cable or satellite or something like that, streaming. But we had this great big giant antennas. Anywhere we lived, we had to have an antenna, because otherwise you wasn't going to get nothing. And sometimes you'd turn on the TV and there'd be a picture, and sometimes you'd turn on the TV and there'd be snow. In other words, like staticky stuff, for those that don't know what I'm talking about when I say snow. And when it done that, that meant you had either the wind had turned the antenna or weather was coming in from another direction, and somebody would have to go outside and turn the antenna. And that meant somebody had to be in the house where they could see the TV, and they could see, they could be near a window, and you'd be hollering out the window, no, back the other way, Yeah, just a little bit. Okay, that's good, until it was adjusted just right. And, so television was a little bit more of an adventure than it is now. Now we've got these streamlined, slim, things that take up looks like a movie theater. They take up a whole wall and stuff like that, and surround sound. It's just like being at a theater. As a matter of fact, I don't go to the theater anymore. Why should I? When I've got my concession stand about 15 foot away, and I can pause and run to the bathroom without missing any of the movies. So why do I want to go to a movie when I got everything I want right there in front of me? So, television, again, another one of those things. Music, music. When I was a kid, most of our music, well, all of our music, either came from a radio, and I had a little I got one for Christmas, and I've still got it. Little red, I should have dug it out. Little red transistor radio that, and it still works. But this little transistor radio, I got it for Christmas one year. I was so proud of it. And but our music was either a radio or vinyl records that we had listened to. Now, record players over the last few years have come back in style, I think a lot because us older folks, it just had a different sound. No, it wasn't crystal clear like these MP3, 1, 2, 3, ABC, whatever all that stuff is. But the sound had the kind of that crackly, but sometimes we just kind of long for the old days, even if it wasn't, even if the things weren't perfect. And so I think a lot of people have missed, or they yearn for those days. And so I think record players and records, I know I own one, record players and records have come back. And I think some of the younger ones are buying into it because they want to experience some of that too. So I think just, retro, vintage, things going in circles just like style. So, but the vinyl records, we listen to those. Now, I remember when 8-tracks came around, we thought we was something because Daddy had bought a Suburban from a lady named Miss Richardson that he had done some work for. And he bought this big old Suburban, and we thought we was styling because this Suburban was probably the newest vehicle we'd ever owned. And because it was, when we bought it, it was, let me think, 3, 4 years old, maybe 4 years old. Sorry, the dog brought me a bone. But it was 3 or 4 years old, and so it was new to us. But this Suburban, it was nice Suburban, but Daddy got an 8-track player for it, and he bought, and I forgot where he got the 8-track tape. Back then they would have like these flea market type places, but a lot of this stuff I think was bootleg stuff. But anyway, he bought this old 8-track player, and he would buy 8 tracks. Now, a lot of these 8 tracks were, I don't know what the word for it, black market or so, I don't know what you'd call them, but they were 8 tracks that somebody had made off of 8 tracks. Daddy he'd get them because, we didn't have a lot of money, and he'd buy them, and some he'd buy new, when he'd have a little extra. But, we listened to those 8 tracks for years. But, there was the progression of, you started out and you had, you listened to radios, and then you listened to records, and then you listened to 8 tracks. And then when it went to cassettes, the cassette tapes, and listening to them, and I remember recording 8 tracks. You'd hear a song, you'd be listening, a song on the radio come on that you liked, and you'd have this big bulky tape recorder, and you'd have to just whenever you heard it come on, you'd hit play and record at the same time, because that's how you had to do in order to get it to record. You'd hit play and record at the same time, and you'd have to listen to the song until it got to the end, and then you'd have to push stop before the guy on the radio started talking again. And it was like this whole thing. So if you wanted to make a whole tape, it took some effort and time. So it was fun days. But today people stream music. They don't think of anything, getting their phone out, and you got Pandora and all the iHeart radios, and you can pick up just about any radio station on your phones. And computers and all of that sort of thing, and it's crystal clear and all of this sort of thing. So, you know, a lot, again, has changed with technology over the years, just in music. Transportation. Cars back then were not fuel efficient. And until prior to the 70s, when we had the oil crisis, and I remember those days even as a kid. I remember where we lived in North Carolina, it was determined whether you could go fill up your car based on your license plate, on exactly how your license plate ran, because you know certain license plates could get fuel on even days, and certain ones could get them on odd days and like that. And of course, fuel was considered high then, and to us now it would be like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. But back then, the wages, even though we don't think our wages are high now, wages back then weren't high either. But each the cost of living from one generation to the other also plays a big part of that, but we're not going to get into all that. But transportation was just a lot different. It wasn't as fuel efficient, and I'm sure as environmentally friendly or whatever, but there were no electric cars, there were no hybrid cars. I remember you'd pull up to a pump and the guy would come out and pump your gas for you and wash your windshield and check your oil and do all those kind of things. And when times went by and you had to put your own gas in there, you'd pull up and Daddy always used ethyl, which was ethanol gas, and back then that's what a lot of the vehicles used was ethanol, and but it was ethyl. And you'd put it even like if it was a full service, and you'd pull up and you'd tell them want ethyl, and they'd put ethyl in it, and it was the cars just most of them were like boats. I mean, they were just huge, and that was prior to the seatbelt laws. So I remember standing up between Mom and Daddy going down the road. For one thing, they liked having me in the front seat where I could see down the road, which meant me standing up and looking down the road, because I got motion sickness really bad. And I would get so car sick driving, when we'd drive through the mountains and going around curves, and I'd get so car sick, I'd carry a little coffee can. I'd have a little coffee can curled in my arm, so when I got sick, I had something to be sick in. I'm sorry for that little tidbit. That might have been too much information, but it was just different times. And if you were traveling very far, we had station wagon at some point. We had a station wagon and we had a Suburban, and both of them had them big back ends back there in the back. And us kids, Mom would throw some pillows and blankets and our toys back there, and we'd go play in the back. And we'd play, and then we'd sleep, and we made picnic back there. And I mean, the whole trip would be in the back of the vehicle, and nobody thought anything about it because that's what everybody did. You could pull up beside another car and there'd be a bunch of kids in the back of that one too. So, I mean, everybody was doing it because there was no seat belts like that, car seats. I mean, there was, car seats were these things that looked like they would have been more dangerous than, because they were nothing like our car seats today. There were no airbags or any of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of safety objects that are on our vehicles today that didn't exist back then. But I also don't remember the big horrendous crashes. I'm sure there were. If nothing else, I'm sure there were some of them vehicles went off the side of the mountains. But I don't think people were quite as much in a hurry to get where they were going. So I don't think you had quite as large a number of crashes as you do today. So I'm not going to say it was safe for us to be back there in the back, but I never felt in danger, and it didn't seem like people tailgated like they do today, or didn't drive crazy and without respect for everybody like they do a lot today. So, yeah, you just different times. And the last one I want to talk about is medical technology. Back in the 60s and 70s, of course, there was a lot of advances. There was a lot of advances. I don't want to make it sound like the 60s and 70s were just, archaic, because just thinking about it, another 20, 30 years prior to that, a lot of this technology that we had in the 60s and 70s didn't exist back then, or it was so early that normal people didn't have it. The government might have had some of this stuff, but we didn't have any of this stuff. And but the medical technology really, it of course, as they were looking into things and that things were evolving. I mean, we were putting men on the moon. We had satellites into space. Of course, nothing like, if you have looked up one of the satellite imagings that shows the real-time number of satellites in space. I don't know how sunlight comes through. There's so many satellites up there. But when you look at all the developments that were starting back then, in the last 20 years, there has just been such a blast of technology in medical technology. Now, I know people still can't figure out, why don't we have cures for cancer and this and that and yonder. Well, I don't know, but I know that a lot of the medical practices that they have now are much better than they were back then. We have MRIs, we have CAT scans, we've got medical treatments that did not exist back then, transplants that are able to take place now that weren't back then. Or at least more successful transplants than back then. So, there's just a lot of technology that has improved, but it was based on the early stuff that was being invented. So with the advancements that we have today are built on the backs of those that came before. So it's fun to look back and see how far we've come, especially with us, with our telephone situation and entertainment as far as TVs and radios and all of that. So I hope you've enjoyed this. It's just looking back a little bit at where we've been and a little bit of where we are today. And I do hope you're enjoying these old days, old ways videos. If you are, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you're enjoying these. I plan on moving, I believe the next one is going to be about education. And we're going to talk a little bit about school, going back to school. But I am old school, and these videos are just old dog learning new tricks, and I hope you enjoy them. Hope you come back. I love y'all. Mountain Patriot Homestead, signing out.